The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.
Hello, friends. Welcome to this week's episode of the Remarkable People Podcast, the Dr. Fred Moss story. This week, Dr. Moss is going to be bombarded with questions from me. I think I've asked more questions on air and off air to Dr. Moss than I have in any episode to date. He's a psychiatrist, a communicator, an author, a coach, but he doesn't believe in pharmaceuticals. Even though he's treated tens of thousands of patients, while his career continued to go, he saw pharmaceuticals not helping. But what helps? Listening authentically to bring joy and to communicate well so we can bring healing to the world. So check out this remarkable episode about understanding humanity, about the mind and the importance of communication to really love and bring joy to one another's lives and wholeness and healing. So get out your pen and paper and enjoy this Remarkable People Podcast episode with our friend, Dr. Fred Moss. Hey, Dr. Fred, how are you today?
It's good. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. You and I were just talking before recording, and it's always good to speak with you. And at this time, I've already told our remarkable community a little bit about you. But if you can start by sharing your story and just go chronologically through from birth, your journey, what you've learned, you know, the highs, the lows, everything in between, and then we'll come up to where you are today. And then where is Dr. Fred going? So hopefully we can help you get there after you've helped us so kindly.
All right. Well, that sounds good. I can dig in, trying to put my whole life into a section like this. I'm curious what I come up with too. So we'll start off in 1958, and I was born the same week of the year as you, after all. And so I was born in March 1st, exactly a week ago, 64 years and a week ago. And I was born in Detroit, Michigan. I was born to a family that had a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old boy, and it was in a fair amount of chaos, a fair amount of disarray. And I think they were waiting for me to come out as a bundle of joy and to bring something new to a family that was really in a lot of trouble. And so that was my job right when I arrived. And it's been my job for 64 years and a week to bring joy and bring communication to a world where chaos and disarray are otherwise present. And as we know now, 64 years and a week later, we are there again, or we are there still. And my job is to bring joy and sanity and to bring communication and connection to the world. Now, when I was born, I didn't realize that was like a unique opportunity for me. But when I popped out, there I was. I was joyous. I was fun. I was a rolling ball of energy. And my brothers and my parents, taught me a lot early on. I knew how to read before I went to kindergarten, and I knew how to add before I went into kindergarten. I knew how to write before I was into kindergarten. So there I was going finally to school. I had my younger sister that I was taking care of. And I was pretty precocious, I knew how to speak pretty big words. And there they were in kindergarten throwing blocks and picking her nose and doing shit like that. I was like, what the heck is this after all? And so, by first grade, there's no teacher. Let's put it this way, Dave. There's no teacher that I had in elementary school who doesn't remember having me as a student. That's for sure. That's for positive sure. And for 7 years, I was loud. I was funny. I was generally bored, but I brought entertainment the best I could. I suppose a cute kid, but a pain in the neck for the teachers. And I was too smart to get angry with. So in some ways I would get, I'd be the top student in the class, but I would be a real royal pain for the teachers. And I lived that way for much of the elementary school. And then even into junior high, one of the things I really knew is that I loved communication. I loved connection. I loved watching my family speak. I realized that they had 4 different opinions about the same topic, and all 4 of them could be considered right. So I was always enchanted. And I was amused and engaged in conversations, and I wanted to become a conversationalist. And so, I figured that when I graduated elementary school and I went in all the way to 7th grade with the big kids, that they would teach me how to finally be a communicator. I figured junior high would be the space where you learned how to communicate. Well, as you might guess, when I got into junior high, it wasn't any better than elementary school. Actually, it was kind of worse. And, kids were even stupider actually in junior high. I was like, okay, I can live with this for a couple of years. It's high school is where I'm going to learn how to communicate. So, I bit my tongue and hung on through junior high and, got myself in a fair amount of trouble. But off to high school, I figured I would finally learn with the really big kids about how to communicate. And of course, when I went to high school, it was worse again. I mean, it was deep trouble in high school. There was nobody communicating with anyone. It was just a bunch of crap, basically superficial crap. So I started preparing to go to college and I didn't really prepare that well. I mean, I stopped doing school. I hated school. So I kind of just hung out in the middle of the class and, like 250th in a class of 500, when really I probably had the goods to be in the top 1, 2, 3, whatever, but I wasn't doing that. And, I started doing stuff that kids did in the 70s. I like smoking weed, and I like, watching sports, and I like skipping class, and I did all that stuff. And nevertheless, I finally got into the school of my dreams because I love their helmet, actually. And that is the University of Michigan. And I felt like Ann Arbor was going to be the place where I finally could dig in, right? I mean, that's where the smart people must go. And yay, I finally limped my way into Ann Arbor University of Michigan. And of course, when I got there, Dave, I learned the same shit that I learned in junior high and high school. And that is that communication isn't taught in college either. Like, really, what I was now being asked to do was sit there and just absorb whatever the boring or nonsensical stuff the teacher was trying to deliver, and then regurgitate it as accurately as possible. And if I could do that, I was considered a good student. And that just seemed insane that's what I had to do to be a good student. I lasted for like a year and a half, and then I dropped out of college. And I went around the country, on a bus and trying to figure out what my life was about. And I had a good time, actually, for a little while. But then it was like, well, this isn't going anywhere. I should probably go back to school so I can get a job. And went back to University of Michigan. And really, it didn't take me long to realize that, indeed, it was bullshit. So I dropped out again. And this time I came home. I said to my mom in January 1980, I said, Mom, I'm not going back to college ever. I'm not going to need to be doing that. I need to be a human, and college isn't going to teach me that. So she got me a job, and this is an important turning point in my life. She got me a job at a state mental hospital, a state psychiatric hospital and I started working with adolescent boys. And I thought I was only going to last about 3 weeks, but that's how long orientation was. And I needed 3 paychecks so I could buy my Volkswagen and get back on the streets and, figure out what my life was about. But in the 4th week, I went to the floors and began to really talk to these kids who are 6 or 7 years younger than me, and really got to see them as human beings. I didn't see them as being anything less than me. And I just, was just super curious, super communicative. And there is the first place that I really got to learn how to communicate in order to heal, was just being with these kids. And it was finally like I had arrived after finally getting out of school altogether. I had arrived at a space where communication and connection was being utilized effectively to create healing. The thing that sucked about that was how psychiatry was treating these kids. So, we would call the psychiatrist at night and say, Jimmy is up too late, or Johnny got in an argument with Timmy. And then the psychiatrist would come down and order some medicine or something. And we'd have to hold the kid down against his will and jam him full of an injection of some sort of drug. And if they stayed quiet for the next 12 or 24 hours, we called that a success. And I just found that to be just unacceptable, just completely like tragedy, like horrible. I hated holding down kids. I hated injecting them with meds. And I hated the way psychiatry was making these decisions without even talking to these kids. So I decided that I would become a psychiatrist. and go back into that field and re-inject communication into the field of psychiatry. It was already sort of a communication field, so I really thought that that's where I would get my premier communication education. While I was in medical school.
Now, hey, before you go on, doctor,
yeah,
I want to ask some questions. You're going and you're giving a great story and it's exciting, but my mind.
Go ahead, roll it.
Your mother, she got you a job at a mental facility with teenage adolescent boys.
Yeah.
Did she do that because it was legitimately just a job, or was she trying to discourage you to go to college? Because that's a hard place to work.
No, it wasn't a hard place to work. She was doing that. She actually got me 2 applications. One was in the unemployment office and one was in the adolescent psychiatric unit. And the orientation started earlier at the adolescent psychiatric unit than it did in the unemployment office. Otherwise, I would have been an unemployment dude for the next 30 years. But
okay, so she was doing it legitimately to help you. There wasn't any ulterior motive. Okay, because I worked
for sure.
When I was in high school, I worked at a psychiatric retirement community, and it was intense. And
that's what I've done for 40 years now. I mean,
yeah, I have the highest respect for you because the things you have to encounter. So to do that with teenagers and children, that would be so hard. So that's why I just want to make sure, was your mom trying to manipulate the situation in a good way to get you move forward, or was it just that's a job? Okay.
No, not at all. She, my brother was already a psychiatrist. My mom, we had already respect to some degree with mental health. But in '87, that's when Prozac was introduced to the world. And when that happened, all of psychiatry was flipped on its ear. So instead of being a field in which communication was the healing modality, there was a myth that was propagated that if you felt uncomfortable, that meant there was something wrong with you. So if you were anxious, or you were depressed, or if you were afraid, or if you were, isolated, or if you were having bad thoughts, people thought there was something wrong with you and that there was a chemical imbalance and that we could treat that with some of these medications. Prozac was the mother bear of all of that. And as you can guess, and really, as you know, psychiatry flipped on its ear in 1987, as did all of mental health. And medication started to be the modality used by psychiatrists. If you ask people, wait, you're a psychiatrist, you're the one who, and if you had to fill in that blank, everyone fills in the blank the same way. That's the field that, oh, you prescribe medicine, right? And it's like, wow, the problem is that's the last reason I would have wanted to go into this. I hated prescribing medicine. I literally hated it. And I did it tens of thousands of times. Over the next 30 years, I prescribed so much medicine to so many different people. And every time I wrote a prescription, there was a part of my soul that was sacrificed. Every time that I called someone out for being wrong, for being uncomfortable, like being sick, for being uncomfortable in this crazy world, there was a part of me that knew there was nothing wrong with them. And all they were doing is living life in this very confusing and crazy, unpredictable world that you and I had already mentioned earlier today. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with them, but I had to say there was, and then I had to medicate them because that's what the industry requested. And so,
can I ask you a question before you go on?
Yeah.
It's very pertinent. So just last night, I was with some friends of mine, and one is a very high-level physician, and we were discussing, they are over 3,500 different physicians, and we were talking about their particular patient load, not specifics, but somehow it got caught up, and they were discussing that they thought that 75% of their patients didn't actually have physical ailments. They were mental and emotional. They're bleeding into the physical. So with that said, when you said you prescribed thousands and thousands of prescriptions for thousands and thousands of patients, how many of those patients, if you're a guesstimate from your experience, had legitimate, mental disorders versus they just had stress and they had guilt and they had trauma that they never dealt with? Like, where would you say that lies?
I'm not sure that I agree that there's any such thing as legitimate mental disorders at all. So the truth is we're all living life to the very best of our ability with the tools that we have. And we're all missing some tools, and we all wish we had other tools. But the truth is we're living life the way we live life, and each life is perfect in its own right. And I'm not positive that I'm any longer in agreement that there's anything such as a mental disorder that helps anybody to declare that they have it. So some of us do some things better than others. Some of us are unhappy or anxious or fearful, or like we mentioned before, or feel like lonely or isolated, or maybe thoughts are going too fast, or unable to complete tasks, or having trouble sleeping, or trouble with relationships. Dude, that is just straight up humanity. That is just straight up humanity. Straight up. There is nobody. If we have never defined the word normal, where do we get off defining something called abnormal? Like you tell me someone who's normal. I really want to, I want to interview that guy, because there is no such thing as normal. And if there is no, unless you decide that we're all normal, and you can decide that we're all normal, it's not like any of us know what's going to happen in the next few minutes. It's not like any of us know really how to live life. We only know how to live life in a world created by agreement realities. We think that if we sit and we listen and we go to work and we don't hurt people, and we, only drink a little and only eat on meals and sleep at night and wake during the day, and we think that that's normal. And we call it normal. And if you fall into that, then you won't be declared anything like mentally defective. But the truth is, once you get a diagnosis, and once I or any doctor starts to medicate you for a mental health diagnosis, you now have a mental health diagnosis for sure. So I'm not denying that. Like, once someone tells you an elephant and you agree that you're an elephant, you're an elephant. That's the way that is. If someone tells you you're an elephant and you agree, and you're like, dude, that explains everything. I'm an elephant. This is awesome. You are then an elephant for that time, for sure. And no one's going to be able to talk you out of it, because you have some stake in the matter. So once you declare that you have a mental health diagnosis, that there's something actually wrong with you, and then you start taking medicines that actually often perpetuate the symptoms they're marketed to treat, because that's what they do by design, then not only are you mentally ill in a way because you agree with your diagnoser, but you're mentally ill because the treatments you're receiving are actually making you mentally ill. So you've got all sorts of reasons to be mentally ill now. And it's a horse and a cart situation. You might be like, oh no, you haven't met my sister. My sister is really mentally ill. Or my uncle's neighbor is really mentally ill. What I'm suggesting is, once you start taking medicines, and once you start walking the world as if there's something wrong with you, as if there's something bad or defected or afflicted about you, then you are indeed living a life of someone who is less than. When we start looking at each other as if we are simply humans going through this, world in without a very good recipe of how to do it, when we start really having compassion for everyone, just living life the best that they know how, given the information and the skill set that they have, now we're starting from ground zero, and we can give respect to people and give compassion, acceptance, and forgiveness to people that they deserve. And when you look at someone in the eye and actually get them for who they are, it is unbelievable that healing can occur instantaneously at that moment. It does not require medication or years of therapy or being institutionalized or anything crazy like that. It really requires simply resonating with another person and getting them for who they are. Now that we fast forwarded to what happened over my career. I did this for 40,000 people, David. I entered the charts of 40,000 people in my life. And I worked in every modality known to American psychiatry. And I even worked around the world in other modalities. So, nursing homes and homeless shelters and inpatient units and outpatient units and residential treatment centers and three-quarter houses and halfway houses and rehab centers and partial hospital programs and prisons and jails and orphanages and home visits. And, I've worked in all of those areas, and I've been a leader in all those areas, in telehealth and in group therapies and, in 12-step institutions, lots of different places. And the truth is, the best work that gets done is when you can look across at another person and actually listen to them until they feel like they've been heard. And at that moment, boom. And that's what we're talking about here. People just really want to be heard. And that's who I've come up with.
Yes. And for your story, let's go back to you're working at this mental health facility with the boys, and then you decide to go to college and become a psychiatrist, and then bring us through today. Because I don't want to skip anything that you feel is important, any challenge you really had to overcome, any just personal struggles that you had to face. We want to go through it, not just to hear your story, but then how did you overcome them and practical steps so we can too.
Yeah, fair enough. I can do that. I mean, I've lived about 3 lives in this 64 years. I have a life just packed with trials and tribulations, and packed with accolades and gifts and attributes. So, I went back to school. Prozac was introduced. Before too long, there I was doing a residency in child and adolescent fellowship. And I started raising my family in Cincinnati. I married a nurse that I had met in my 4th year. And we moved down to Cincinnati, and I raised 2 kids for a while in Cincinnati. Not for a while. I mean, they actually lived in Cincinnati their whole life, before they went to college. And 2 beautiful kids who now live in Texas. They're doing fabulous, both of them. They're amazing. They're my 2 best buddies. And shout out to them if they're somehow catching this. I love them. They're everything. I mean, they were the reason to live the rest of my life, was to have them. And, then we ended up divorcing, and I ended up being in another family and marrying again, and this time in a blended family. So 2 more daughters. I had 4 teenagers for a while, and went to all sorts of soccer games and events, and, juggled a whole life with 4 kids while I was being a psychiatrist on call everywhere and running around Cincinnati with the 2nd biggest practice in town. And as I said, kind of hating that part of it, like hating the diagnosing and hating the medicating, like really just liking it immensely. Nevertheless, I made up some money, and I was powerful, and people cared about what I said because I was an MD. What are you supposed to do? Throw your MD back in the river? It's like, so there I was. And when that stopped working, and it really did, in 2006, I began to take people off medicine. And that was a really important piece. I got myself in a little bit of a challenge with the medical board. I had a DUI in 2002, and then 2006, they got track of it. And then they wanted me to double and triple back and do all this crazy shit. And I did everything the way they wanted me to. But when I came back out of that, and, never lost my license or anything like that, I started doing things a little more radical. I was a little more grounded. I was like, you know what? You only live one life. And if I'm going to get in trouble that way, then I might as well actually do things the way I want to. And I started taking people off their diagnosis and off their medicine. And lo and behold, without any surprises here, they got better. Each and every person that I took off their medicine got better. And I started realizing that these medicines are actually making people worse. And I started doing it with a little bit higher risk people, and they got better. Almost everyone got better. And even some people got so much better that the system wasn't ready for them to be healthy. The system counted on them being like mentally ill and dragged up and stuff. And so when they got well, their family or the community wouldn't support them getting better. Then they wanted them to get worse again. And then they would be back on medicines and take back their diagnosis. It was kind of tragic.
And discuss this, because we have people in America, we have podcast listeners all over the globe in over 90 countries. Mm-hmm. And a lot of countries aren't going to understand how the health system works. Even Americans don't understand how the health system works. But if you were to get people off pharmaceuticals and they were well again, that disrupts the money flow.
It disrupts a lot of things.
And so explain a little bit more when you say society wasn't ready for them, because people are like, what? Why wouldn't you want people healthy? But the sad reality is these companies don't want people healthy. So talk about that.
It's not just the companies. Sometimes it's the family or the spouse or the parents who don't want them healthier, because, you know, they serve a real function. If they're walking around drooling and, you know, sleeping too much or shuffling or, you know, being obvious that they are somehow deranged, then the family can blame all their issues on the identified patient. And then the patient themselves can also blame their own humanity on a diagnosis. So, you know, when I'm a jerk to my wife, or when I'm, you know, cause some degree of trouble somewhere, or I hurt someone inadvertently or even intentionally, if I can blame that on a psychiatric diagnosis rather than on me being human, I will gladly do that. I would do that in a second. I mean, why not let something else take responsibility for me being a jerk? So there's that. We relinquish the responsibility of our life when we take on a psychiatric diagnosis. And here's the other thing, you know, if you've got a car and we got 4 tires and, you know, and they're all at different air pressures, and you decide that you're going to make one of them normal, one of the tires normal, the car is not going to ride any better with one normal tire. The car will actually ride worse with one normal tire. So systems get built around deficiencies of particular identified clients. And the community is really built to absorb those identified clients and have them stay sick. So it's not just about the money flow of the companies. Some people think that if you blame the companies, or blame big pharma, or blame insurance companies, or blame the doctors or the medical system, the truth is there is an incentive to be at any point in this incredibly complex, yet in some ways diabolically beautiful system called the mental health complex. And no matter where you are, including being a diagnoser, when you're a doctor or a social worker, you know, when I was in school, social workers, they weren't even allowed to make diagnoses. Now they are like the #1 diagnosers. And when you make a diagnosis on somebody, there's some ego thrill that there's something well enough about you to have you be able to judge another person as being less than normal. And there's incentive to that. Like, if I could tell you there's something wrong with you, that must mean that there isn't something wrong with me. And the truth is, every piece of this thing has an incentive to continue to perpetuate. But here's the real truth. The real truth is none of us know what the hell we're doing. Not really, you know, and I know that you're a man of faith. And once you start getting, well, there's a way to learn what to do. You know, we can look at the book, or we can look at a different, you know, ways of tradition of managing our lives in a way that is steady and consistent with a higher honor, with being committed to something larger than ourselves. And once we start doing that, maybe we then learn a little bit about what to do, but it isn't because we know what to do. We already know that we don't know what to do. That's why we lean on God. You know, that's why we lean on the scripture, is because we already know, left to our own devices, we'll drive ourselves into the dirt quickly. And when we get that about each of us, when you can look across the table at somebody that you or they have already deemed to be mentally ill and get that, no, they're not mentally ill, they're them. Like, maybe you're not mentally ill, maybe you're just human. When we starting from there, all sorts of super great things get reset, and we have the possibility of healing those who otherwise were pretty committed to being defective. So that's what happened over the next 15 years, is that it isn't just the American system, by the way. People in other countries who are listening to me right here, they're already resonating. There are very few countries that aren't running on the same theory. You know, there are, like Nairobi. If you look at Nairobi, one of the things that Nairobi does, or it might be Rwanda actually. And I think what they do is when you're feeling deranged, depressed, sad, anxious, fearful, etc., they set you up with an older woman, usually a grandmother, on an orange picnic bench that sits there in the park, and you go talk to her for a couple hours and you walk away, you're completely cured. That's it. There's no such thing as Prozac or Zoloft or Seroquel or Adderall or any of that. That is not what they're prescribing. Now, what they're prescribing is conversation and connection. And, in Australia, there's some things called surf therapy, where you show up and you just surf for a couple weeks and then you're all good again. It's like you just get loaded into being connected with nature or another human being. And what you thought was defective, like, oh, I'm depressed, or, oh, I'm anxious, oh, I'm, psychotic. It's like, maybe you're none of those things. And maybe what you really need is just a reintroduction to nature and to other people. And that's how I've been running my program since about 2006, slowly but surely easing off the gas, medicating people less, telling people before I medicate them that it wouldn't be, that if it was up to me, I wouldn't, this did not make me friends everywhere, but people would come and ask for medicines, and I'd let them know that I don't think the medicines are going to help them, but if they really want medicines, they can have it. And people would get pissed at that. They'd be like, well, why are you saying that it's not going to help? And it's like, because it's not. That's why I'm saying. And I mean, I can give it to you if you really want it, but these medicines aren't built to help you. They're built to perpetuate the system that it's marketed to treat. And, if I could have a business plan of any different good or item for which selling that item created a need for buying that item over and over and over again, that's a pretty good model. That's a sweet model. That might create a perpetual $1 billion a day industry. Oh, that's what we have in the mental health industry. So it is, in fact, the #1 most profitable industry in the history of planet Earth, the #1 most profitable industry in the history of planet Earth. And you don't get to be the #1 most profitable industry in the history of planet Earth while you're being legitimate. The only way you can do that is to be illegitimate. Now, here's the other point. Whether it's illegitimate or not, pointing your fingers across the table at one component of it isn't very helpful. One of the things that, your viewers or your listeners can realize is that if you're ready, if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, if you're sick and tired of this diagnosis thing, of having your whole life fade away in front of you because you believe, or someone told you you're defective and you agreed with them, no one is holding you down every morning and giving you medicine. No one is making you buy the notion that there's something wrong with you because some doctor gave you a diagnosis. You can indeed, with a little bit of assistance and a little bit of coaching, and I do provide that level of coaching, you can re-optimize yourself. You can reset. You can find yourself again as somebody who is not defective, literally, without changing who you are. Like, the medicines might be adding to you being defective. These medicines, like, if you don't believe me, if any of you don't believe me, all you have to do is start taking someone else's medicines and see if you feel better. You'll feel way, way worse. I promise you feel way worse.
Anybody who's watched a commercial for pharmaceuticals, it's like, hey, we're going to cure your elbow rash. And they have 300 ways they're going to kill you with that same medicine. So I think if anybody's being objective, they understand what you're saying.
Well, let's look at the elbow rash, because I use that as an analogy a lot, the elbow rash. And here's how it goes. If I walk into the doctor and the doctor says, oh, you got, I'm like, dude, I've had an elbow rash for 3 weeks and it won't go away. And he's like, well, I got the cure for that. I'm like, oh, good. They told me you were the best. And it's like, yep, I got the cure for your elbow rash. Are you ready? He said, yep. Okay. Come back tomorrow. We're going to cut off your arm at the shoulder. I'm like, really? Yep, we'll do that. And then we'll check to see if you have an elbow rash. So I come back the next day, they cut off my arm at the shoulder. And then I come back in 2 weeks for my checkup and they check for my elbow rash. No elbow rash, no arm, but no elbow rash either. So if we get myopic about this whole thing, it's true. We can take away an elbow rash. We can take away your depression. All we have to do is take away every one of your emotions and depression will go away too. If we could take away your anxiety, all we have to do is take away your capacity to deal with life in any kind of real form, and you won't be anxious anymore. And then we'll check for your anxiety. It won't be there. And we'll pretend that that was a cure. But the truth is, we cut off your arm to take care of your elbow rash. And if you look simply for elbow rash, when I come back from my checkup, it won't be there. And you can pride yourself that you cured that elbow rash by cutting off your arm. Now, a lot of medicine is built on that, but I'm speaking towards psychiatry for the most part. So, People would come into my office and they'd be like, I'd be like, hey, how you doing? And they'd say, oh, I'm okay. And then if I wanted to be an idiot about it, I would just write a note like, patient believes they're okay. And then, okay, cool. Well, let's represcribe and see you again in 3 months. But the truth is, I knew that they weren't okay. They're shaking and sputtering and depressed and anxious, and they say they're okay, but that doesn't mean they're okay. And when I started taking people off of medicine and their diagnosis, that's when their real humanity, this resilient life force that we all have, began to reemerge. And I began to see people again. It was a remarkable, miraculous experience to start taking people entirely off their medicine. Now, here's the thing about your listeners. What I want your listeners to really get is that life is absolutely, absolutely miserable, terrible, intolerable, frequently enough. This is not to diminish the experience of having a life that isn't working. You may indeed have a life that isn't working, and I'm not suggesting that that isn't happening. What I'm suggesting is that that doesn't make you sick. You don't blame a log for burning in a fire. You put a log in a fire, it's going to burn. You don't be like, what's this burning log all about? It's in a flipping fire. That's why it's burning. Life is difficult. And this is in no way diminishes that. Some people think that I'm saying something like it's all in your head, you're not sick. No, here's what I'm saying. It's not all in your head, you're not sick. It's all real, you're not sick. You are confused? Hell yes. If you're not confused, by the way, I also want to interview you. You don't know anybody who's walking around now saying they got it together, like they're not confused, is full of junk, man. That's not true. So being confused isn't a sign of abnormality. It's a sign of dealing with the insanity of the world effectively by getting that. Hold on a second. None of this is making any sense to me. When we start doing that, when we just be honest with ourselves that we are looking at another human there who is trying to figure out how to take the next step in this crazy world, just like we are, I'm telling you that healing arrives there, emerges there instantly. And all of a sudden you have somebody who may have been heard for the first time in their life by you getting what they're standing for. Now, over the next several years, that's what happened to me. I began to, little by little I tried out all sorts of new ways, whatever I could do. When telehealth came out in like 2008, I was the first guy on the block to be doing telehealth. I did so many Zoom calls. I did so many Zoom calls. People didn't even know what Zoom was when I was Zooming. These days, like back in the day, David, when I was first coming out of residency, if I saw someone talking to a TV, I just immediately hospitalize them instantly. There had to be something wrong with them. These days, if someone doesn't talk to a TV, you hospitalize them, because that's all we do now is like, what am I doing right now? I am staring at millions of pixelated lights on a flat screen and pretending that I'm with another person called David. Dude, I'm not with you. Let's face it. I am looking at a flat screen of lights that is representing something that sort of pretends to look like you. And we're calling this a relationship. Now, back in the day, had anyone been seen doing this? This was an instant long-term hospitalization. So the possibility is to really get that. That's cute. That's a cute dog you got there. And the possibility really, really exists to meet people where they are and to give them access to optimizing their life by actually accepting, forgiving, and having compassion for anywhere they are in the world. Welcome to Humanity got designed as a function of that. My kids grew up, I was all over the world. I went to Israel, I went to, Europe. I was doing work from one country to another, just trying to find a place in psychiatry that I could actually call my own and be a healer. But once I began to really see people for who they were, that was when I really started being a healer instead of as a doctor. And Welcome to Humanity got designed as a way of really getting that all of life, we're talking about all of life being precious, including the miserable aspects of it. And then over time, Welcome to Humanity had me doing less and less formal psychiatry, and I started doing transformational coaching. I started doing restorative coaching, helping people not get into the medical system if they didn't want to, or helping get out of the medical system if that's what they wanted to do. But more than anything, really just helping people see that they were okay. They were literally okay the way they were, even if they felt completely terrible. So that feeling terrible and being okay are not mutually exclusive events. It's okay to feel terrible, and you can be okay even while you feel horrible. That's the thing. It's just part of being human. So over that, and again, you and I discussed this a little bit before the show, that's when I really got to going into, shortly thereafter, I got into going into podcasting. I was an obvious podcaster, given that I've been a conversationalist since I popped out 64 years ago. And I really enjoyed being a podcaster and really liked helping people learn how to podcast. So I taught a course called True Voice Podcasting, and we recently had our graduating class have a beautiful summit. And there's a second course now that I teach, second cohort, same course, with a couple really cool friends, teaching people how to go from zero to podcaster and broadcast their honest to goodness, authentic message, their honest to goodness, true voice into the world. So my book just came out called Find Your True Voice. I know that's shocking, but that is the name of my book. And I have another book called The Creative 8, which points towards, when we're being creative, our symptoms or our negative experience tend to dissipate and disappear right away while we're dancing or singing or, cooking or gardening or doing art or music or those kind of things. So the Creative 8 and Find Your True Voice, as well as Welcome to Humanity, and another brand called Global Madness, where I predicted pretty much what's happening now, was just natural throw-offs of who I become. So now I'm a healer. Now I really assist people in getting that maybe it's time that we can work together. Maybe we can unify. Maybe we can bring our true voices together and self-express ourselves, inside of our authentic message and in a community. And maybe we can even end wars, David. It's possible that with true voice and with love, that simple combination, that we can end wars. Because what's really missing in almost every war we're having internally and externally is authentic message, is our capacity to speak our truth, is our capacity to be in community and to love each other. And if we bring that, and we still can bring it, we can. There's no reason. Look, we think that it's no longer useful to be that. Well, that might be the end of humanity. Once we give up on love and give up on true voice, I'm pretty sure we don't have anything bigger than those two things. So see you later. Catch you on the flip side. Yeah, let me know how it goes for you.
Wow. Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground, and that's some fantastic information. Thank you so much, Dr. Fred. So between your birth and where you are today, I got a bunch of questions. So, but between birth and where you are today, is there anything in your story that we skipped that you want to cover that's significant in your journey?
Dude, there is so much in my story that we've skipped that I could cover that is totally significant. Every single event that I had, every single journey, every single partner, every single city I lived in, every single job I've had, every single, rough experience that I've had, times, challenges with my kids, or challenges with money, or challenges with authorities, or, all the great things that I've had, the awards that I've won, the diplomas that I've earned, the accolades that I have, the plaques and the trophies, all the things all the pets that I've owned, all the, accidents that I've had. I have a couple of near-death experiences in cars where I flipped a car going 90 miles an hour into the woods. That was, I suppose, an important experience. Another one where I, the DUI in 2002 was actually connected to a head-on car collision that I had at 5:30 in the morning, where I woke up, I fell asleep at the wheel and woke up looking out over a cliff, having had the right side of my car meet the right side of his truck. And that saved me, and then my experience with that guy is magical. I have stories on stories on stories on stories. It's not like Oh yeah, that's the exhaustive history of my life. No, it isn't. That's about 0.25% of my life. And that's what I have to offer for right now. So when you ask questions, I may in fact, bring up some of those, refer back to some of those.
Okay. So let's just go chronologically.
Go ahead.
When you were in school, you were
Yeah.
ahead of the curve and your intellect's at a higher level than the average bear.
Yeah.
Would you go through school and listen to your teachers and instructors with the attitude like, this is easy? Or was it more like, hey, I want to know not just, okay, calculus, this is how you do the formula, but why does it work? What kind of
Mhm.
mental angle and mental
Yeah.
focus did you have?
Well, that's a good question. I think it was actually both things. In elementary school, it was easy, but they just, like I remember I was in the 6th grade reading class in 1st grade. They just moved me up so that I got to, and I felt really like proud of myself, but I was also somewhat outside the range of normal. So, I'd go read with the 6th graders while my 1st grade friends were trying to learn the alphabet. And so I was always a little bit different. And I think I always did get that it was easy, but then I became a real helper to the teacher. Like I would help other students get whatever they wanted. I was always interested in that. If the students would let me, I loved helping them. If my colleague students would let me help them, I loved helping them. Eventually, what got taught was so absurd that I couldn't believe that we had to learn it, that you had to fill my head with this crap that had no chance of ever being used again. Now, going up to calculus, when you start going to calculus, I was a Michigan math finalist when I was in calculus in 11th grade, but I was getting high every day. And it was like, I wasn't even really giving myself the kind of energy that I needed to do calculus right. And I appreciated calculus a lot, actually, because it's so beautiful of an art with derivatives and integrals and all that. And I appreciated physics for the same matter, and appreciated biology and chemistry for the inherent sort of circular reasoning that supports those scientific reports, supports the scientific formulations. But it wasn't so much like, why does this work? Or why does it work? Or, tell me more about people. I think that's where my struggle was. My struggle was, how is this going to help me be a better person in the world? How is this going to help me communicate with others? Because I was and have been every single day, for maybe my whole life, I think it's been my whole life, I'm just a proponent that communication is at the heart of all healing, all connection, period. And if what you're giving me is actually pulling me away from communicating effectively, then that feels like a intrusion. I don't care if it's calculus or physics or anything. If you're not teaching me how to be better with my humans, then I want to know why you think this is a good use of my time.
Yeah. And let me ask you, when I look at the system, the public school system, even the private school system, we're born, they shove us into school. And again, this is the North American norm. It's in most countries, but not every. They push you into school early. You're going to pre-K, then K, then you go through 18 years of schooling to get another degree, another degree. By the time you're done with school and raise your kids and get any kind of stability, you're 40, 45 years old, and you look back, you're like, what just happened with my life? Probably the root cause of what people call a midlife crisis, right? But they don't teach you. I went through school, bachelor's, master's. I didn't go as far as you with doctorate degrees, but they don't teach you communication. They don't teach you money management. They don't teach you the difference between negotiation and compromise. Negotiation is good, compromise is bad. They don't teach you basic conflict resolution. Why, like that goes through my mind. That's like the fundamentals of what we need. So in your world, after seeing so many broken people, not broken, but damaged people, hurting people,
fractured,
and then you see
wounded,
them, and you said the number one wounded, you see the number one way they heal is through just human communication and love.
Yeah.
If we were to start fixing the system, how, from your experience, you see that what would that look like? Where would it start? Because to me, it's like, well, let's go back to kindergarten and really start teaching this, because obviously our families aren't teaching it. So what would you think, based on your experience, of where do we start fixing the problems?
I think that if we, kids are brilliant, kids are brilliant, and just like they are. And if we start treating everyone like, no one has to learn. I think no one has to learn anything more than how to be great with each other. And then everything else you learn becomes gravy. In other words, I'm not so great at being great with everyone. I'm not. There's some people I'm not that good with. And there are other times where I'm not that good even with people that I wish I was better with. But really teaching people how to communicate, how to be with another person, the impermanence of this life, for instance, it'd be good to just have that. So, managing the whole trauma-based concern of life and death. You've had a number of deaths this week in your world, and people are so afraid of death. It's so wild, that people are so afraid of death, and that is the only thing that is inevitable in our life. So the thing we are most afraid of in the whole world is actually the only thing that is certain. That is an absurd combination. We are totally terrified of the only thing in the world that is inevitable. Houston, we got a problem. And I think I would really help people with that too, like really bring forth what is life? What is death? What are we here for? What can we learn from others? What do other cultures have to offer? What do other people have to offer? Can we sit with others and absorb and be enchanted by and be affected by and be curious about other people's points of view? If we can do that, where we actually listen, even if we disagree to our very core, then the possibility of moving this whole earth thing forward, moving this whole humanity thing forward, becomes really, really relevant. Until we do that, there's no chance. If you're not speaking your true voice, then no one will ever know you. Period. If what you're speaking is some sort of version of yourself that you're pretending to be so that you can protect the person that you otherwise would be if you tried to be yourself, what kind of life is that? The biggest tragedy that I can imagine in the whole world would be to live an entire life and have it never happen that anybody ever got to know you. And how can people get to know you if what you're running around with is a story that's actually protecting yourself from being seen for who you really are? So there's something like really maybe embracing the confusion, embracing the absurdity, embracing the pain, embracing all of life as being exquisite for what it is. And from that, bringing forth that we are all humans, and we can actually, when you consider this, isn't it somehow even a little fun? Like when you do this, when you're like, what if I was to go in life and be really amused with the next idiot I meet? Like there's some fun, there's some release, there's some power, there's some freedom that actually comes from being amused, enchanted, and curious about what any idiot has to say.
And now that goes into the question when you define and talk about normal. Even you said, just when you were telling your story, use a term, you were outside the range of normal, meaning with your, you were a higher intellect and thought process than your peers at school. Society oftentimes sets normal. And as a Christian, like I have a Christian worldview where I believe the Bible is the word of God. So that's kind of my baseline, my standard, my foundation. So I base my normal off that. When you're using the term normal and society changes, where is the balance in that? So for instance, you have someone who has a heterosexual relationship. That is considered normal. You have someone who wants to have sex with a goat. That by society and by my standards would be abnormal. Where do you stand on that? Are you telling that person, hey, you have an issue, you shouldn't be doing those things with a goat? Or are you saying that's okay, be who you are? That I was unclear on that.
Yeah. Well, it's a tough question. I've never really been asked what I would do with someone who comes to me concerned about either themselves or someone they love having sex with a goat. So I haven't spent a lot of time exploring this exact question, but I think,
well, maybe pedophile. Look at pedophilia. Like right now in California, there's a real issue with legislation trying to pass. That's a huge issue. They're trying to say you have the right to have sex with children. Those children aren't even developed yet. That is wrong. And even if you disagree with me, that's okay. But in sanity, in my mind, come on. Kids don't know life. Kids don't know who they are. They're children. They shouldn't even be thinking about sex. And now you're saying some person who wants to have sex with them should have the right to do that. I have a strong opinion on that.
Yeah.
So are you telling me though, that if they find it normal, it's okay? Or are you saying, no, you have an issue and you need to be addressed?
No, I'm not saying either of those things. What I'm saying is that in order for you to be effective in taking on the issue that's really important to you here, for instance, this heinous crime of allowing adults to have sex with kids, you better get that the people you're going to have to deal with deserve your respect, because without your respect, you're not going to get them to do anything different anyways. If you're going to go at, you're a effing idiot and I hate you and hate all about you and you can't do that and we can't, you're not going to be effective in the world anyways. You need to respect people for being where they are. So for instance, with pedophiles or with, paraphilias or whatever, one of the best things to do, it's not about condoning their acts in any ways. It's about getting who they are as human beings when you're having conversations with them. It doesn't mean that you're supporting the crime, the criminal activities that they might be doing, or, they might even be addicted to. There's probably a very angry or afraid or hurt soul there. And that angry, afraid, or hurt soul, believe it or not, deserves your attention if you can find a way for that. You, as a man of God, I'm sure you've either heard stories or maybe of yourself or of friends or colleagues in your faith of people who have turned around really horrible lives, like really crazy habits that they had, that they no longer have because somewhere along the line they felt heard, whether that was in the church or by an elder or by God themselves. Once you feel heard, that's where the opportunity comes to be healed. And it's not saying that everyone can do whatever they want and it's okay. It's like getting, well, if I can look at all those experiences as being part of life's challenges, some of them are intolerable and unacceptable, way intolerable and way unacceptable, that's when I have the best chance of affecting change in the world. It's like somehow getting that there's someone over there really with too much fear or too much pain or too deep of a wound. And in order to affect any kind of positive change, I don't know a better prescription than to listen to them.
Okay, so it does sound like we're talking the same language, because if someone has an issue, no matter what the issue is, and they're coming to you for help, you help them and you listen. And the people who are really twisted and have wires crossing their brain, they, most of the time, I think you'd agree, you're the professional, they've been abused and had things happen to them that rewire the brain. I mean, would you agree with that?
Sometimes, yeah. I think most people think that, that we've all had massive traumas in our life, but yeah, maybe they've had particular traumas that they haven't recovered from. Sure. And their brain, I don't know that their brain got rewired. I think that they're just responding as they're responding, which is in a suboptimal fashion. It's amazing what happens when you finally listen to somebody. Whether I've had plenty of experiences with, felons and pedophiles and, people who are locked away in prisons, jails, nursing homes, et cetera, that once they get heard, you're looking at an entirely different person, than the person who was doing that while they were isolated.
Yeah. And that's where I was going with this. So the person working through the issue and trying to be healed and free, that is a good thing. And that is a process worth the time. But someone actively going out molesting children, I in no way, shape, or form would ever say that is okay behavior. So that's where I was going with that. Like, you're not one of those people, you're just like, there is no normal, do what you want. I mean, you agree that would be unhealthy, unwise, and horrible to that child. So that's what I just wanted clarification on, because there's some people who think, oh, like, listen, I'll be frank, I'm a man. Okay. Boys have penis, girls have vagina. That's kindergarten cop. I believe it's mental illness if somebody says, oh, I want to be a girl today. Like, I don't see that as normal. So again, correct me. I don't care if we're live on air. I don't see that as healthy. I don't see that as profitable in any way. And it's definitely not a biblical stance. So that's why I just want to make sure for our listeners, when we're throwing the term normal and there is no normal, I agree. You and me and every human, when we just sit there and talk with one another and share love and be understood, major radical changes happen. But if the person's living without conscious and they're doing horrific acts, I can't tolerate that. That would be like saying what Hitler did. You know, you were raped by your stepfather, so you kill a bunch of Jews. There's no way that's okay. Does that make sense?
Well, you're kind of crossing over a couple different borders here. It's certainly a touchy issue, and what I'm saying is I'm not condoning any of the behaviors anytime, but if you're going to affect change of any level, it's worth respecting that person over there is just another human soul, even if they're committing ongoing intentional heinous crimes. And what are you going to do? I mean, you can either reject them out of hand or think that they should be killed or stoned or, sent to jail forever, but that doesn't cure anything just because we're intolerant of behaviors. There's an opportunity to look at these behaviors, figure out what it is that you would never do, and live a life of high honor. But dishonoring others, that's when it gets a little bit tricky. When you're choosing to dishonor others who you think are, worth dishonoring, it gets a little bit tricky then. And I'm not here to argue that point per se. I've been in the jails, I've been in the rehab systems, I've been in the prisons, and those are not places to rehab at all. And punishment doesn't make those people any better. So what does make them better is when they get heard.
Yeah. And and again, I'm the kind of guy, we can be totally one of my best friends in life. We're agreed in almost everything. But when it comes to politics, I mean, you go black and white, polar opposites. But I have legitimate questions, and if I'm wrong, I want somebody to tell me, and I want to be able to pray and explore it and really search out truth. What is truth? Now, let me ask you a question. From your experiences, I used to sell less lethal weapons. So I'd go into prisons and jails and correctional facilities, and, I'd have minor interaction with the inmates, but I'd have interaction with the guards and I'd hear stories. And I just didn't see success rate of people going to jails and prisons. And it was very rare. And even the ones that turned their lives around, supposedly, they'd usually fall back, and it's a dangerous thing. So what have you seen? Like, obviously my world is my world, but as a professional, have you seen people really be a pedophile and be free from that? Have you seen people be a rapist and be free from that? Or is it pretty much they're stuck?
No, I don't think they're stuck. I think you can be a pedophile or a rapist and be free from that, but you're not going to get free from that by going to prison.
So what is it, something they need to make a conscious choice on their own to get help? Yeah. Or do you think the system should be reformed where, okay, if this person is caught raping a woman, what should happen to them to get them healed?
So again, all that's really here, I don't know about getting them healed. I think I'm just going back to the first thing I want to know is I want to know their worldview. I want to listen to them. I want to hear what's there. I want to feel their pain. I want to catch their fear. I want to be with their anxiety or their isolation or their anger. I just want to be there with them, because the magic happens with that. It does not happen with punishment, and it does not happen with years away from society. It just doesn't. So, the magic, in my experience, hundreds, maybe thousands of times, happens when people are heard. And that's when the most shocking miracles take place. And so maybe this rapist or this pedophile or something, or whatever they're, even mass murderers, etc. It's not always simple, and it doesn't work for everyone. And some people stay bad. I mean, they stay really bad. And I don't want them anywhere near me or my family ever. And or with anyone that I love or care about. I don't trust them as far as I can spit. And there's something to be learned about those people too. It isn't like I'm going out there interviewing all the dangerous people in the world and telling them that I love them. On the other hand, there's something about loving each and every soul in a way that has you get that it's all in assistance for you to have a full and total life.
Yes, and I agree with that. And every situation is different. There's hundreds of thousands of complexities and uniquities. But I do want to talk and make something clear, and you correct me if I'm wrong. Let's say there was a pedophile and they seem to be fully restored. Like they really saw the error of their way and they've changed. God forgives them. The people can forgive them. But we'd still be a fool to let them babysit our 6-year-old child. And I believe that. And what's funny is we just had a guest who that exact thing happened, and her own uncle raped her, right? And you hear that story all the time. And if someone was an alcoholic, I'm not going to put them in charge of a restaurant bar. So do you think again, we forgive and we love, but there's also a balance of wisdom we need to use?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a balance of wisdom we need to use. It's possible that if you let someone who has no history of pedophilia at all take care of your 6-year-old, that even worse things could happen. So it's not necessarily true that someone with a history of pedophile who then gets reformed is more dangerous than someone who you don't know has a history of pedophilia. Most pedophilic people aren't caught yet, and that's part of the crime, is that they're doing it and they acting like they hate pedophilia, and in the meantime they're still they're caught up in their own perversions. And so you can't really protect entirely. And so I guess my point is that having a history of a certain crime doesn't necessarily, and then being reformed doesn't necessarily make you at a higher risk of committing that crime again than somebody who has no history of, at least no known history of that crime. People are people, and there's a matter of really, trusting and not trusting based on your inner intuition. If you don't think that man should take care of care of your child, then please don't let them take care of your child. You got some intuition that says that, then don't let them take care of your child. That's on you a little bit. And on the other hand, that could be someone who has committed a ton of crimes or not. I was just talking with my wife yesterday. Some of the organizations in Cincinnati, like there's a particular bagel factory downtown Cincinnati where 100% of the employees are felons, are convicted felons. Like, and that's a prerequisite to be an employee at the place. And the place is absolutely gorgeous. It's just like the coolest place in the world to go to get bagels. It's like the sweetest place in the world. Everyone knows that these are just felons who have, reformed their ways and are here having a job. And those bagels are so tasty, and the way, the service is so great, and the people are so wonderful. And there's a non-pretension that runs through there. And some of these people, they committed some serious heinous crimes, and they're out in the streets again. And should that person, I'm not afraid to hire that person to work in my business. Not at all.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's true. I'm not saying everybody who's created a crime is bad and it's forever bad, but I think there's a wisdom in being aware of, I think from my history and from looking at statistics, you definitely have, if you took 100 people and 100 people who have pedophilia in their past, they're going to have a higher repetition rate because it's in them. It's been programmed in them. It's happened to them. They've experienced it. It's like an addiction almost. So that's where I was going with that. But again, I want to make sure.
Well, it's more than pedophilia. You see, they don't just have pedophilia. They have socially already exposed pedophilia. That's the difference. The difference between them and those who aren't caught yet is that they are now dealing with the world coming down on them for having been exposed for being a pedophile. So there's an additional component of these 100 pedophilics, for instance, because all of them have already been identified with that. And there's a trauma to that too, that alters who they are. So we get it that they're different than the so-called non-pedophilics, but there's also this other group that are secret pedophiles who haven't been caught, and they're probably more dangerous than the actual pedophiles, but we wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, 100%.
We wouldn't be able to stratify that, because we wouldn't be able to find them, because they're not identifiable, and we wouldn't be able to say that, so in fact, there's a crew out there who is more dangerous than the convicted pedophiles, and that is the unconvicted pedophiles.
Yeah, there's a false sense of security and you don't see it coming.
You don't see it coming, and you're pretty comfortable. Uncle Joe has no problems with pedophilia. He's never been arrested. So, little do you know, Uncle Joe's got a great system for pedophilia, and he's more dangerous than Uncle Jimmy, who's been in jail twice for pedophilia.
Oh, thank you so much for talking with us, Dr. Fred, because everybody listening, it's hitting home in some way, and hopefully this is benefiting their life to have a deeper understanding. So when we were growing up, you'd have people use the term nervous breakdown. And people would have a nervous breakdown from pressure, from trauma, from stresses. And I was always told, and what I witnessed was, once that rubber band snaps, they don't go back. And they might recover, but they're not the same. Is that a fallacy, or is there some truth to that mentally? Like, once the mind...
It's really on the same thing I just said. Once you're exposed and you get called a certain thing and you agree that you have it, and then you take medicine or therapies that are geared towards adjusting that, it actually perpetuates the symptoms it's marketed to treat. So you have a nervous breakdown. How do you know you had a nervous breakdown? Because you went to someone who actually confirmed that it was that, and then they began to treat you for that through either therapy or medicine. And now you not only know you're an elephant, you're being treated for being an elephant. And when you're being treated for being an elephant, now there's a confirmation that you are that. And if you agree that you can never go back, that it's unrecoverable, whatever going back means, by the way, I don't know anyone who's ever gone back to anything, including you or me. Like, you don't go back. Going back it's a false, that's the illusion. The fallacy is that you can go back to anything. So once you've been identified and exposed and then labeled and then treated for a particular condition, you have a propensity to continue to show that condition because of whatever reason. If I believe, like, for instance, my hip hurt yesterday after my workout, and I know that hip pain because I used to have it when I wasn't working out. Now, if I believe that my hip just broke or something like that, I will not spend any time rehabbing it or exercising through it. So today with my trainer, we went right at this hip. We went right at this hip in a way that I've never done before. And now my hip feels better than ever, having gone right through that. But if I would have just bought that I got a broken hip, I got a hip that's not working well, I got a hip that's suboptimal, then I would never take on what it would take to actually rehab my hip to bring it back to normal or bring it back to being effective or strong. So there's a lot that goes into the mindset once we're identified with something that we agree is a defective deficiency.
Okay. Well, let's do this then. I got 2 more questions for you if you have the time, and then we'll turn into where are you today and where are you heading so we can help you get there. There's people who suffer trauma, real betrayal, real seriously life-changing things.
Yep, for sure.
The society we live in says exactly what you and I have talked about for the last hour and a half. Medicate the symptoms, don't treat the real issue. So someone had trauma, they were betrayed, they were harmed. Where do they start? Give us some practical steps so the listeners, myself included. I'm hurting, I struggle with depression, letting go of the past. Where do we go to start?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've written 2 books, and I think both of them are really, as I think about it, both titles are an answer to this question. So the first book I wrote was called Creative 8: Healing Through creativity and self-expression. And when we're being creative, when we're in the world of art, music, dancing, singing, drama, cooking, writing, gardening, photography, cleaning, when we're being creative during the act of creation, we can alleviate a lot of the negative vibrational symptomology that we have. You might notice that even some of the artists are some of the most pained people in the world. You know, some of the finest musicians, they have had some trauma of their own, and they're leaking out through their own creativity. And that really is a great space to express that part of humanity, which is ultimately, you know, intolerably uncomfortable. So creativity is one space that I think really does address that. But I think the second space, and this comes from my next book, the Find Your True Voice book, is to find someone somewhere that you can share your pain with, like authentically. Like, what is it about your present circumstances that has you all twisted up or all, you know, wrapped around the axle? And that takes something. You know, that might be a lover, it might be a friend, it might be a priest, it might be, you know, it might be, I don't know, a work colleague or a neighbor or a stranger. It might be a doctor. But I think when you go to a doctor in this situation, it's where it gets really tricky. Because when you go to a doctor, us doctors were trained to call you wrong. Okay, we're trained to diagnose you. We're trained to give you a defective diagnosis. In fact, if we don't give you one, we won't get paid. If you come into my office as a psychiatric patient and I write no diagnosis, no one will pay me.
It's a broken system.
Well, that's just the way the system works. So when that happens, yeah. So you know, it's like if you go into a barbershop enough times, you're going to get a haircut. And that's what we're talking about here as well. So I don't know that going to a doctor is the best ticket. I think the best ticket is to be heard and to be creative. And if anything else, to help anyone do anything. So you might find that, you know, being of service is not a bad idea in this situation as well. So bringing your trauma forward because others have experience and are interested in what you did or what you're not doing to address your trauma. That's another way to manage this.
So serving others, talking through it, and
being creative.
And creative can be, it could be on a computer, it could be through painting, it could be whatever, building cabinets, anything that we find enjoyable.
Yeah. Art, music, dancing, singing, drama, cooking, writing, gardening are the creative 8. And then a couple more, photography and cleaning. And then the final one, which is helping anyone do anything.
Yeah. Did you ever hear this song, Count Your Blessings? A lot of
Yeah, I think I have. Yeah.
Did you ever hear the story about that?
No.
Yeah. So there was a woman who was always depressed and she was going to her pastor, I need help. He's like, yeah, I'll absolutely help you. But hey, I'm short for time. Can you go deliver groceries to this other woman? She's like, oh yeah. And the next day she comes back and says, oh, I'm really backed up. This person needs a meal. She's like, oh, I'll do it. And then after like 3 or 4 days of this, she was so busy helping other people that her depression went away.
Exactly. That's how it goes. Yep.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
All right, last question. And then we're going to transition to where you are today. And this is something that, again, based on your worldview and based on your perspective, it could change your answer. So I just want Dr. Fred's answer. When I read my Bible, Old Testament and New, Satan fell, betrayed God. A third of the angels followed him. A fallen angel is just a demon. In the biblical history of the Bible, it talks about people being demon possessed. They're crazy. They're out of their mind, right? Have you seen people where you felt they were demonically possessed and they literally just had something in them that was controlling them? Or do you feel that everything is trackable, can be explained and cured? Because that's something that in America, we completely almost throw that out. But in foreign countries, they still think, oh yeah, demonic possession's real. And when I read my Bible, a third of A third of the demons didn't just disappear when Christ arose. They're still walking the earth. So I'm not saying you're possessed, you're possessed, you're possessed, but I do believe there are people that possessed and it's causing what we categorize as mental illness. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I don't make that equation necessarily. I don't disregard that equation. I'm curious about, people who think that. I don't have answers to a lot of things. It's not like one or the other. There are people in the world doing things that I find to be unbelievable and like shocking and, just deeply disturbing. And whether or not they're demonically possessed or they have some deep issues that, again, are the best. I almost don't really need to know what the source is, because the best answer for all of this all the time is to listen. It just is. I don't have a better answer. And that's, I'm really here to respond the best way that I can. And it isn't like listen and offer them up my neck. It's like, listen, what is really there? What can I learn by this person who many people are calling demonically possessed? Or what can I learn from whatever the behavior is that I find to be, against my greater core values? And it's not all simple. It's not all simple. There's massive confusion in the world. It's okay to represent yourself, to allow yourself to be massively confused.
All right. Well, with that, Dr. Fred, we appreciate you being here today. Thank you for all your insight. But where is Dr. Fred today, and where are you headed so we can help you get there?
Yeah. So, where I am today is really in this world of helping people find their true voice, of listening authentically to as many people as possible, of creating massive community, of realizing that we can end war actually with true voice and love. We can do a lot of things if we are willing and able and strong and courageous enough to bring our authentic message forward and then deliver it effectively into the world that's waiting to hear it. So that's who I represent. That's what I'm doing in my coaching. That's what I'm doing in my expert speaking. That's what I'm doing in these podcast gigs. That's what I'm doing in my own podcast hosting. And I don't have anything that much better to do. I have a beautiful wife. I got these 3 cats who own me. They're unbelievable. Desposito, Valentino, and Winston are my dudes. And I have these 2 kids who are down in Texas doing great. And really what I have now is just a matter of pouring on whatever I can find in the world of love, whatever I can find in the world of amusement or enchantment or sage-like wisdom. I've lived a life. And so the opportunity for me isn't that I have all the answers. And frankly, I think I have sort of none of the answers, other than the idea that it sure seems like love is an effective way to get through the world, and as is listening. And so love and listening and being connected to others is where I'm headed. And, I create summits, I create some events. The next event is going to, generate over $1 million between now and 3 weeks from now for the war-torn Ukrainians. We're going to be looking at, offering massive funding and massive awareness to those who are suppressed in Ukraine and in other areas of life, other areas of the world where free speech is being suppressed. So I'm a big proponent of the capacity for free speech. It is being threatened for all of us. And, it almost doesn't matter where I say I'm going, because tomorrow the world's going to serve me up something different than I saw coming anyways. And I'm going wherever it takes me. So, that's the truth too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So how would someone reach you? I'm going to put links in the show notes, but what's the best way for someone to reach you, to learn more, or to connect with you for some coaching?
So I think if you want some coaching, that you might want to, people who are listening or watching this might want to just plug into findyourtruevoice.com. I'm sorry, it's called findyourtruevoicebook.com. That's where my new book that just got released 2 weeks ago is. And I'll send you a free copy of my book. All you have to do is pay for shipping. That would be one way to really get an answer. But if you really are looking for some coaching, you don't want to come through the mental health system, or you really want to you speak to your own authenticity and find your true voice, if you find this something that resonates with you, then the best way to get a hold of me is just to write me at drfred@welcometohumanity.net. That's drfred@welcometohumanity.net. And you can also find me on Facebook and on LinkedIn. I don't like Facebook very much, but everybody and their grandma's there. So I guess I have to be there for now. And so Facebook, LinkedIn, and a little bit of Instagram. And then, writing me, I will respond. You'll get me specifically, and we could set up a call and see if coaching or the mastermind that I teach or any other form of assistance that I can provide might be available and interesting to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Fred. Ladies and gentlemen, please, like our slogan says, don't just listen to great information that Dr. Fred brought, but do it, repeat it each day so you can have a great life in
Indeed.
this world and an eternity to come. So Dr. Fred, thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a pleasure and joy, and I hope we continue the friendship. And for our friends around the globe, reach out to Dr. Fred, reach out to me if we can help you in any way. Check out some back episodes, check out some future episodes, like us, rate us, review us, do all those great things so more people can hear truth like Dr. Fred just brought us. So I'm David Pasqualone. Thanks again, Dr. Fred. And to our listeners, we'll see you in the next episode.
Awesome. Out.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.